All right. Well, about a week ago, when it was announced that Jorge Masvidal was going to fight Kamara Usman on 6 days' notice, everyone came out of the woodwork and they were saying, well, all the boxing journalists and combat sports journalists, for that matter, were coming out of the woodwork and saying basically, oh, well, more fighters need to step up and take fights on short notice. If they stayed in shape, they would be ready to take a fight without having to have a full 8-week camp. So all these armchair quarterbacks, basically, all these journalists, a lot of them don't even go to the gym or work out and keep themselves in shape, but they want to sit there and tell fighters that they need to be in shape 24/7. And it's one thing being in physical shape, good condition, and it's another thing being in fight shape. So once again, all these guys supposedly know better than the fighters themselves. And there was even back and forth between fighters and some of these journalists saying that, oh, how do you know how long it takes to prepare for a fight? Every fighter is different. And to make a blanket statement like, well, these guys need 8 weeks to train for a fight because they're not in shape and the first 2 weeks of camp are just there to basically lose weight. Well, again, nobody walks around at their fighting weight. So, of course, you're going to give yourself and need to give yourself some time to drop some poundage. There's no question about that. Now, no one's saying that it's a smart thing to do to walk around 20 to 25, 30 pounds above your fight weight. I get that. Although a lot of fighters do that in today's boxing and MMA and all combat sports. It's very prevalent that guys are walking around significantly heavier than their fight weight. But just to make a blanket statement like that all fighters need to step up and take fights on short notice and be like Jorge Masvidal. Well, you have to ask yourself this question. Was it really the best thing to do? This is a guy who's had a 17-year MMA career. Finally, he gets a title shot. Did he really give himself the best chance to win that fight on Saturday? Guy took the fight on 6-day notice. Took the fight on 6 days' notice. Did he really give himself the best chance to win in the biggest, most important fight of his life, his first title shot in 17 years? And then he had to drop 20 pounds in 6 days. Honestly, was that the best thing to do? Did he give himself the best chance to win? Well, even he said at the end of the fight that he felt as though he would have done much better with a full training camp. Now, for all these journalists out there, these boxing journalists, these MMA journalists, these combat sports journalists, to sit there and presume to know what's best for all fighters, how long a training camp should be for all fighters, it's like anything else. Everyone is different. Some people can study one day and pass the test with flying colors. Other people need to spend a month or maybe 2 months to study to pass an exam. Not everyone's the same. Not everyone's naturally gifted. Now, I know these guys have been fighting for their whole lives practically, but again, everybody's different in their preparation. And just to assume that everyone's out of shape, that's why they need a long camp. You ask any fighter in the biggest fights of his career how long he trained for them. And I can almost guarantee you that in the big fights that fighters have had, the biggest fights of their career, I'm sure they trained more than 5 or 6 weeks. Some guys train 10 or 12 weeks for the biggest fight of their career. But generally, the average training camp is about 8 weeks. So to sit there and say guys should be training 5 weeks for a big fight, like, how would you guys know that? You guys have never ever prepared for a fight. You've never trained for a professional fight. It's one thing going to the gym to try to stay in shape. It's another thing preparing for a fight mentally, physically, psychologically. Okay? So what's wrong with having a full 8-week training camp to give yourself the best opportunity to win? All you have to do is go back and listen to the post-fight press conference. And Jorge Masvidal basically admitted that he did not give himself the best chance to win. He said, I had a shitty performance and I would have done much better if I had a full training camp. So all you guys that said, oh, well, more fighters should do that. Really? So more fighters should have shortened training camps and put in shitty performances as a result of having a shortened training camp. And more fighters should lose 20 pounds in 6 days. And you think that's optimum conditions for preparing for a professional fight. Not only a professional fight, but the biggest fight of your career. The first title shot that you've received in 17 years. Now, I'm not knocking Jorge Masvidal. Okay, I'm sure he got paid handsomely for it. But why would you guys knock all the other fighters who decided in the past to turn down fights on short notice? John Jones turned down fights on short notice before. And he's the best to ever do it in MMA. But he didn't want to leave any stone unturned. So you might as well have the extra time to prepare. It could only help you, not hurt you, unless you're overtraining with a lot of your conditioning work, if you're doing too much cardio or whatever. But these guys know what they're doing. And generally, a training camp is 8 weeks, sometimes longer. Sometimes longer. Go look at all of the biggest fights in boxing or in UFC and ask those guys how long they trained for the fight on average. And I'm sure most of them trained at least 8 weeks or more for the biggest fights of their career. So I just found it bizarre that journalists were actually arguing with fighters when fighters were saying, well, how would you know what we go through in a training camp? How would you know that we don't need the 8 weeks? What makes you a connoisseur on training camps? You're a journalist. Just like some of these journalists will criticize fans for talking about the money side of the sport and saying, how do you know, calling them fanagers and this and that. Okay, so don't be a hypocrite. What makes you a trainer? What makes you a physical conditioning coach? What makes you that? A strength and conditioning coach. What makes you that? How do you know that everybody doesn't need 8 weeks to train for the biggest fight of their life? What makes you think that is too much for a fighter to train? And they're just sitting there assuming that all fighters are lazy, or the majority of fighters are lazy and this and that. You do what they do. You go through a training camp like they go through. So I just found it funny how you had people on Twitter arguing with fighters and telling them how long their training camps should be. I just found that funny. And you could look at the Andy Ruiz situation, but he was just coming off of a fight. He was already in shape, so he could just go right back into training. And even that isn't always optimal, I think. I think after a big fight, sometimes you need to let your body heal and rest up and recharge the battery. You know? But to sit there and, to think, I have no problem with people praising Masvidal, but to sit there and make that the status quo, that everyone should just take fights on short notice because they should always be in shape. Okay, once again, I repeat, it's the difference between being in shape and being in boxing shape. Any professional boxer or UFC fighter will tell you that. Being conditioned and being in fighting shape are two different things. So I just found it hilarious that these guys who never trained for a professional fight in their life, who never trained a professional fighter in their life, are going to sit there and tell actual boxers what's best for them. And sit there and talk down to a boxer who's done it his whole life and has trained for fights his whole life. Okay? So it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous that we're going to sit there and just minimize how important it is to have a full training camp for fighters. So now all of a sudden, training camps should be 5 weeks now. Let's just make them all 5 weeks, regardless of who the fighter you're fighting is. It's one thing taking a fight on short notice when you're fighting an average fighter or a tune-up fighter. But if you're fighting the biggest fight of your life and fighting for a title shot, for your first title shot in 17 years, this is not the fight to take on short notice. Now, again, that was his decision to do that. I'm not going to criticize it. But I think if he had it all to do over again, he would rather have had a full camp, obviously. And now he gets pushed back to the end of the line because he lost. Now Dana White can say, why should I give you a title shot? You lost. You lost badly. I don't have to give you a rematch. He's already on bad terms with Dana White in the UFC. They're already having their back and forth. Right? They're already having their back and forth. So now Dana White has this loss to use as leverage to say to him, I'm going to freeze you out for future title shots now. Why is Dana White going to do this guy any favors? Now, he did Dana White a favor by saving the card. Don't get me wrong. But Dana White could look at it this way. This guy continues to bash me, continues to bash my operation. Okay, says I'm underpaying him, says I'm treating him poorly. Why should I do this guy any favors in the future? So this is what people don't understand. You take a fight on short notice, you don't give yourself the best opportunity to win, then you end up losing as a result of not giving yourself the best opportunity to win. And what happens? You get pushed to the back of the line and you got to work that much harder to get back up in the front of the line again. So ask yourselves this, geniuses, armchair quarterbacks, guys who supposedly know more than the fighters themselves, who've never trained for a professional fight a day in their life. Ask yourself this. If you were managing Jorge Masvidal, would you have advised him to take this fight at this time? Now, especially in boxing, where you're ranked and you have sanctioning body. The UFC, that's like the Wild Wild West. Doesn't matter what you're ranked. I don't even think they officially rank fighters. I mean, I know Sherdog ranks the fighters or whatever. I don't even know if it's their official rankings. I don't know if you're mandated to defend against a certain guy. I don't think it works that way in the UFC. Basically, Dana White decides who's going to fight who. But in boxing, it's a whole different ball of wax. Why would you jeopardize your ranking where you can make yourself a mandatory contender? I know sometimes you have to continue to fight eliminators, and it's up to the sanctioning body to enforce the mandatory. We all know these things, but at least you're in that position. Why jeopardize that position if you already have a high ranking? Why jeopardize that ranking? Why jeopardize that position? Why put yourself out of the running and jeopardize your mandatory slot by taking a fight on short notice against a top level guy? You want a tune-up? You want to stay busy fight? Yeah, fine. You want to fight a mid-level guy? Fine. But if you're fighting the biggest fight of your career and people are expecting you to just take a fight on short notice for the biggest fight of your career, that's just not smart. You're not giving yourself the best opportunity to win the fight. So I ask all these armchair quarterbacks out there, all these so-called journalists out there, hindsight is 2020. Now, do you feel the same way about it after the guy himself said that he didn't give himself the best chance to win, that he had a shitty performance, that he knows he would have done better with a full camp? The fighter himself is telling you that he would have done better with a full camp. So now is he wrong? You're gonna criticize him. You're gonna go back and forth, and that's another thing. You have these journalists arguing and going back and forth on Twitter with fighters. How professional is that? You're gonna sit there and go back and forth arguing with a fighter. It's ridiculous. It's one thing debating, but you're sitting there arguing with the fighter when you have no experience preparing for a fight. You're not qualified to have an official opinion on how long it takes to prepare for a fight if you've never prepared for a fight. That's like telling a doctor how to operate on a patient when you've never done it before. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. We know if a guy bullshits in training. We know Andrew Ruiz didn't train in the second Joshua fight because he said it. He admitted it. Okay? We know that. So to sit there and assume that everyone can prepare for big fights in 5 weeks, that's ridiculous. Just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'd love to see some of these guys prepare for fights. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens next. Will Masvidal get rewarded for taking this fight on short notice and saving the show? Or will he get punished for losing because Dana White holds grudges against fighters? There's other fighters who have complained about money, and then after a couple losses, Dana White says, why should I give them fights? I'm not going to renew their contract. Dana White's not going to do you any favors if you complain about the organization, if you complain about your money. He's not going to reward people for that. And Dana White does hold grudges. So exactly. Raphael Dawkins, Combat Radio, he's spot on with his analysis. The guy was gassing in the second round. This is a guy who's normally in phenomenal condition. But you can't expect the guy to lose 20 pounds in 6 days and be at his best. Even at his best, he may not have won, but he still would have done a lot better than what he showed on Saturday night. So I'm dying to hear what you guys are saying Monday morning now. I'm dying to hear it. I'm so curious to see what you guys are going to say today on Monday after this fight. I'm really interested to see that. All right, guys, that's about it. Make sure you check out the Ringside Reporter podcast every Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Beeb is out. Talk to y'all soon. Stay safe and have a great day. Enjoy yourselves out there. Stay well. Peace.